Hi, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am currently reporting from the parking lot of Lucky Lady Casino, just north of Gardena, California. In the first installment of this poker vlog, I was also here at Lucky Lady Casino, and I was playing the 2-3 game. The max buy-in for that game was $500, and I decided to change things up a little bit, and the goal today is to play the 1-2 game. The max buy-in for that game is $200. So slightly lower stakes, but the game should be great. There are 4 or 5 tables currently running, and I am on the wait list. So slightly lower stakes, but at least we get to buy in for 100 big blinds. So we're happy about that, and hopefully we get another good result. Thanks for watching. Peace. So as mentioned, we're playing 1-2 with a $200 max buy-in. So that's what we buy in for. In the very first hand that was dealt to us, we looked down at the King of Hearts and the 9 of Clubs in the big blind. The under the gun player makes a minimum raise to $4. The player to his left calls, the small blind calls, and I also call. This is a case of do as I say, not as I do, because going multi-way to the flop is not ideal. In most cases, I would recommend either raising or folding when you are in the blinds, especially with this kind of hand. It doesn't play well out of position, and we're letting some pretty weak hands see the flop for too good of a price. Fortunately for us, though, the flop comes king, king, deuce with 2 spades. The small blind player leads out for $3. Definitely a strange move, but you never know what to expect at these stakes. So I decided to make the call, hoping to keep the other players in the hand, and hoping that maybe one of the other 2 players in the hand might also raise. One of the remaining players folds, and the other player makes the call. At this point, the small blind player actually shows me the ace of diamonds and says that he has a better kicker than me. Again, you see some pretty interesting stuff at lower stakes. The turn is the 10 of spades, and the small blind puts in a bet of $12. The second spade on the board introduces a potential flush draw, but I still don't think a raise is in order given that I have position on the small blind player. Plus, I know he doesn't have a flush draw since he showed me the ace of diamonds. So I make the $12 call, and the remaining player makes the fold. The river comes the king of spades, which gives us quads here. And boy, is it nice when your opponent bets into you and you have the best possible hand. But he only bets for $10. Of course, at this point, I have to try and get some more money, but I wasn't exactly sure what size I should have made my raise. I think it's reasonable for him to have a hand like ace 10 or ace deuce, so that's what I ultimately end up targeting by going all in for his remaining $60. I mean, he only had a pot size bet behind, so I was hoping that maybe he would call, thinking that I was trying to get him off a chop, or maybe he was trying to induce a bluff if he did end up having ace 10 or ace deuce. As you can see, he ended up folding pretty quick, so yeah, I'm not entirely sure about the sizing on the river there. In this hand, we look down at Queen 9 of Hearts. We're in the cutoff here, and the hijack makes it $5. He was usually making raises to $6 or $8, so mentally I took note of this strange size and decided to apply some pressure by raising to 15. Going back to my previous point about either raising or folding, I think it's important to be a bit more aggressive. Raising here gives the remaining players a bad price to call, and this way my range is uncapped. By uncapped, what I mean is that I'm representing all of the strongest hands here as we go to the flop. I can easily have all of the aces, kings, queens, etc. In contrast, my opponent's hands are capped since he didn't raise my $15 bet pre-flop. The flop comes 4 deuce 8 with 2 clubs. My opponent checks, and even though this flop is better for my opponent than it is for me, I still think a small bet here makes sense to tell the story that I have a good hand. I also don't want to give my opponent any free cards just in case he is chasing a flush or maybe a straight with ace 3, ace 5, maybe even 7-5 suited, for example. The turn comes the 6 of spades, introducing a second flush draw on the board, and now the board is looking even worse for my hand. I think it over for a bit, going back and forth between checking and betting, and ultimately I decide on a $25 bet, which is half of the size of the pot, with plans on firing a third barrel as a bluff as long as no club, spade, or a card that improves my hand comes in on the river. For example, if a queen appeared on the river, I would probably just check back, given that I would then have showdown value. The river comes the 5 of diamonds, and my opponent checks to me for a third time. Going back to potential hands that I could represent, I have some good hands here, such as aces, kings, queens, and I'm blocking the nuts on this board too, which is a straight with 9-7. Also, I don't have any clubs or spades, which means my opponent is more likely to be on a flush draw than I am. And while I'm using these reasons as justification for why I should be betting, I think a simpler answer is that I know I can't win this hand at showdown, which means the only way I can win this hand is by putting on some pressure, which I do by going all in for his remaining $90. He doesn't snap call, which is great news, so now all we can do is hope that he doesn't get too curious and make a call with a hand exactly like the ones we're putting him on, such as ace X of clubs or ace X of spades. He thinks it over for a little while, but ultimately decides to make the fold. So great news for us, and he actually told me after the hand that he had the nut flush draw with the ace of clubs, so glad I pulled the trigger on that bluff. So in this hand, we look down at queen 5 of hearts, and we are in the cutoff position, just right of the button. There's one caller from the under the gun +1 position, and actually, I think in this hand we were playing 7-handed, so that under the gun +1 position is actually the low jack, technically. But anyways, I'm not even entirely sure what I'm doing raising to $6 with queen 5 of hearts here. Maybe I was just excited after that queen 9 of hearts hand and wanted to push my luck. I don't know. Anyways, I get 3 colors. So we go to a flop of king of spades, 4 of spades, queen of spades. This is called a monotone board, given that all of the cards are of the same suit. Unfortunately, we don't have any spades. We're only sitting with middle pair here with a pretty bad kicker. I decided to bet $20. At the time, I was thinking that maybe if I put in a bet here, I might be able to take this pot down with some aggression. But looking back, I think the only option is to just check, given that there are 4 people in the hand, and I'm very unlikely to get a worse hand to call here, other than a flush draw maybe. And even then, flush draws here have a lot of equity against my hand. If we take a look at this screenshot from a poker odds calculator that I found online, at the very worst, it's a nearly 50-50 shot that I win this hand by the time we get to showdown. Plus, I think my hand in most cases just gets worse as the turn and river come, so definitely not happy with my $20 bet. The turn comes the 9 of clubs, another card that I'm not very happy with. This time I decide to slow down and check, and the player on the button checks as well. The river comes the queen of clubs, so improving me to trips. So I'm feeling a little bit better about this hand, and my opponent decides to go all in for his remaining $29. And at this point, I can't fold, but I'm not really happy about the situation. The only thing that went through my mind is whether or not I need to shove to try and get the button off of the hand, which I don't, and I don't think that would have been the right move anyways. But really quickly, I wanted to make another comment about pot odds, similar to what I did in the first episode of this vlog. If we look at the pot odds that we're getting in this situation, we need to call $29, which means the final pot will be $151 after I make the call. Doing the division, this gives us 0.1921, or about 19%. Again, I'm not doing this math exactly at the table, but I wanted to provide you with some heuristics that you can follow in order to quickly analyze a situation at the poker table. Here I provide a table that you might find useful to keep in mind when you are facing bets that you are considering calling. If you are facing a quarter pot size bet, you need at least 17% equity to make the call. If you are facing a half pot bet, you need at least 25% equity. If you are facing a 3/4 pot size bet, you need 30%. For a full pot size bet, you need 33%. And if you are facing a 2x pot size bet, you need at least 40% to make the call. So you don't need to calculate the pot odds exactly at the table, but as long as you know roughly where you stand, knowing this table can be really effective. And if we look back to our situation, our opponent bet $29 into $93, which is about a third of the pot, which means we are somewhat in between a quarter and a half pot size bet, which is what we get when we do the math. So I end up making the call, and the player on the button ends up making the fold, showing us the ace of spades and a six of diamonds. Unfortunately, our opponent in the big blind turns over pocket kings, which was totally unexpected, to be honest. His pocket kings gives him the full house, and that beats our trip queens. So maybe forget everything I said earlier about capped ranges when they don't raise pre-flop at these stakes. Oh well, on to the next hand. All right, so in this hand, we look down at queen 9 of clubs in the big blind. The under the gun player just makes the call to $2. A middle position player raises to 4. The button player calls the $4, and I decide to make the call as well. I'm not entirely sure that's the best play here. Again, I think raising is better than just flat calling, but that's what I end up deciding to do here. The flop comes queen 8-8 rainbow, and the action checks through on the flop. The turn comes a magical queen of hearts, which gives us a full house, queens full of eights, and I decide to lead out for about a third of the size of the pot of $6, and the under the gun player just makes the call. The other two players in the hand end up deciding to fold, so it's just me and the under the gun player. Given that I gave him such a good price to call on the turn, I think it's reasonable for him to have like an ace X type of hand. The river comes the 10 of spades, and at this point I'm just trying to extract the most value that I possibly can, targeting obviously any 8, any 10, any ace X holding, and I end up deciding to bet a full pot size bet here of $30 into 29. And my opponent doesn't wait too long before making the call. I flip over my hand, and he tosses in jack 8 of hearts. So an unfortunate bad beat for my opponent, as he has a full house eights full of queens, and I beat him with my full house of queens full of eights. So a good result here for us. In this hand, we look down at queen of hearts, 10 of clubs in the small blind. There are a couple of limpers in middle position that just make the $2 call. And the player on the button looks down at his cards, thinks about it, and ends up putting in a raise to just $4. I thought this was really curious. I think that's just too small of a raise to really accomplish anything. So I try and pounce on this opportunity by putting in a raise to $16. I even think that I could probably go bigger here, but $16 is what I made it. One of the players in middle position ends up making the call of $16, but the player to his left and the player on the button who originally made it $4 ends up folding. I'm going to fast forward through a little bit of this because the players at this table were moving a little slow. So fast forward to the flop. The flop comes Jack of Hearts, Deuce of Spades, King of Spades. So this board is not only good for our specific hand, but also good for our range, as we can have pocket kings here, jacks, aces, ace, king, etc., as we were the ones putting in the raise pre-flop. I end up deciding on a $15 bet, but I think I would have liked to see a bigger bet here given that there's a flush draw on the board. Unfortunately, my opponent snap shoves for $110. And going back to our pot odds heuristics, when facing a 2x pot bet, you need at least 40% equity in order to call. In this case, with an open-ended straight draw, we only have a 17% chance of hitting a straight by the time we get to the river. So definitely not a spot where we should be calling, and I end up making the fold. So tough spot, but kind of have to make the fold there. In this hand, we look down at ace-9 of hearts in early middle position. The player to my right, who is in the under the gun position, makes the raise to $7. Again, I think if I'm playing this hand, I should be raising here, but I end up just making the call. My goal for the next vlog is to be a bit more aggressive when entering pots. I think flat calling is just too weak and can easily be taken advantage of when playing at higher stakes. The flop comes ace of spades, 3 of spades, 10 of hearts. So a pretty good flop for us with top pair. It is a bad kicker, but at least we have a backdoor flush draw. And the pre-flop aggressor decides on a bet of $15 into 30, so half pot. And at this point, I think there's merit to both calling and raising here. By calling, we give a good price for worse hands to call, but on the other side of the same coin, we also give a good price for flush draws to continue and perhaps hit a flush. So we end up just making the call, and the turn comes the 8 of hearts. So definitely a good card for us, as now we are one step closer to making the nut flush here. The preflop aggressor decides to slow down by checking to me, which now opens the door for me to decide how I want this hand to play out. I definitely didn't want to let anyone chasing spades see a free river, and I covered everyone at the table with the effective stack at this point in the hand being about $100. Given that the stack to pot ratio is essentially 1-to-1, I decided to put everyone else all in. I think our hand could be best here, and even if it's not, we at least have some outs with the flush draw. So I go all in for $100, and only one player makes the call for his remaining $65 or $70. The river comes the 8 of diamonds, pairing the board, and we turn over our hand to show the ace of hearts, and he says we're good. Our opponent ended up showing king jack of spades, so he was on the nut spade draw. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the turn bet and just glad it worked out for us. On to the last hand of this vlog. In the last interesting hand, we look down at jack 9 of diamonds in the cutoff. The under the gun player opens the action to $4. The player to my right makes the $4 call. I again decide on a call instead of a raise here, and the small blind player also makes the call. The flop comes ace of diamonds, 3 of diamonds, 4 of spades. And the pre-flop aggressor decides on a bet of $10. We have a flush draw, so as I wait for the player on my right to make a decision, I'm definitely contemplating putting in a raise here. The only thing holding me back from raising is the fact that this player is betting into 4 people on the flop, so he's definitely representing a strong hand. Ultimately, I decide on just making the call, given that I'm in position in this hand, and both of the blinds fold. The turn comes the 2 of spades, and this card now introduces 4 to a straight, so any 5 would be a straight on this board. I'm more likely to have a 5 here than my opponent, and I think my opponent senses this as he bets small again for $10. The price is too good for me to fold, and I'm not entirely certain that I want to raise in this spot. He could easily still have hands like ace king, ace queen, ace jack, etc. that are definitely not going to fold, and I do want to see the river. The river comes the 8 of hearts, and my opponent actually slows down and checks to me. I take this as a sign of weakness, so I decide to put in a bet of $25 to try and make it look like I'm value betting. Also, I have no showdown value, so the only way I was winning this hand was if I got him to fold. But I quickly realized that I am very wrong, as he immediately puts in a raise to $80. So I snap fold. And that was the last interesting hand of this vlog. So thank you again for watching, and see you next time. All right, so just finished up with a 3-hour session, roughly. We were in the game for 280, I believe, and out of the game for a whopping 282. So, you know, sometimes that's how it is. But overall, there were some pretty good hands, and I look forward to recapping them tomorrow. All right, later. All right, so thank you for watching this episode of my poker vlog. But before you go, I just wanted to say thank you for all of the support that you've shown this channel already. I really wasn't expecting all of the likes and the subscriptions and the comments. So all of your support has really meant a lot to me, and I look forward to making more videos. On the note of comments and feedback, one of the feedback items that I got from the first episode of this vlog was to keep track of my net hourly, which I will do from here on out. And if you're interested in the results from the first vlog, here they are. And the data from this vlog are going to be right here. So again, thank you for all the support. It means a lot, and I will keep track of my data from here on out. And if you have other ideas or pieces of feedback for me, like I tell my students, any feedback is good feedback. So if you have something on your mind, please share it with me, and I do my best to read all the comments. Okay, take care. Peace. Last thing before I forget, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow, and you can do that here. Okay, thanks. Bye.